All right, y'all. We're going to start with something that I was talking to my daughter about the other day. And it's interesting right now with me and my teenage daughters. I guess you could say I'm a little bit provocative with them because I feel like, especially in the past couple years with the way everything shook out in my divorce, basically I've been like a third parent, like not a third parent. I have had my kids for about a third of the time, and it's going to be close to 2 years before that gets resolved, and it's still not resolved. Coming up here real quick, there's another meeting, and it looks like it's going to go to 50-50, but so yeah, they've been, my teenage girls have been with their mom for, 2/3 of the time, really. I mean, and so I'm kind of, I was doing a lot of my own, of course, healing, and just for a while I was like, I don't know how much energy I have to like help them. I was like trying to help myself, and that sucks. And am I proud that that I was so weak and vulnerable to that whatever, that I had to take my own time to heal? No, I'm not proud of that. I honestly should have seen it coming, and I take accountability for that. But now that, I kind of got my head straight, and I just don't, I don't need to, I've healed, whatever that means. It's like I've gone through the process and the disillusionment of all that stuff, and I'm on the other side, and I'm like, one of my daughters is going to college next year, or actually this fall, and then one's a junior in high school, so I have like a year and a half with her. And I'm kind of just trying to help them start to design their life a little bit and start to think about the things that I didn't think about, and I didn't, plan for. I guess if you were to ask me, what, when I was their age, what I was going to do. Of course, I was going to go to college. And yes, I wanted to be a father and a husband, and I wanted to have a family. And I just kind of thought all that stuff would shake out the way it was supposed to. And while it kind of did, it also, like, I could have designed it a whole hell of a lot better. And I would have had a lot more discernment in terms of who I married and who I did business with, and just like discernment. I just, it's that old saying, if you knew now what if you knew then what you know now, you wouldn't make all these mistakes. And do I look at my life as a mistake, and do I regret it? No, I don't regret anything. But there is the possibility that I can maybe save my daughters just a little bit of what I went through. And of course, just like I had to learn my own lessons, make my own mistakes, and they will, and I will be there for them when they do that. I hope I don't feel like I'm trying to judge them for whatever choices that they make, but I'm in this mode where I have 6 to 8 months with my oldest daughter to just kind of put some thoughts into her head about, what designing your life will look like, what choices you can make now that will, set you up for success and planning and all that. And one of the things that, this was with my 17-year-old, my junior high schooler, I was talking about tattoos. Now, again, if you love tattoos and you want to get a tattoo, I don't care. If my daughter said she wanted to get a tattoo, of course it And this is what I was telling her, because she doesn't want, she told me that she doesn't want to get a tattoo, and that's not her thing. But basically I said, look, if you decide to get a tattoo, a couple things. One is understand what the price of that is. Because, you can wish everything into existence. You can try to wish everything you want, the reality of that, into existence. But the bottom line is, there are going to be people, especially if you're a woman, and I know she took offense to that I categorized women in that are going to judge you for that, and they're going to potentially block you from certain opportunities. And of course her argument was, you should support anybody who wants to make a choice for that. And I was like, I'm not supporting anybody or not supporting anybody. I'm trying to help you understand what the price is. It's like if you're going to buy a car, if you and I were going to buy you a car, we would go out and shop. Maybe we'd look at a Honda, we'd look at a Toyota, we'd look at a Chevy, a Ford, whatever. We'd look at the price. Price would be probably one of the top things that we would look at because we'd have a budget. And then we'd look at reliability, cost of upkeep, cost of all the things down the road. And then of course there's the whether you like it or not, that's important. Nothing, but you'd want to know the cost, of that choice, right? And that just seems obvious. I don't think anybody would argue that that's misogynistic or homophobic or racist or whatever that is. That's just a price of something. And all your choices, especially as a young woman and as a young man, have a price that you will pay. It's like, you date somebody who isn't loyal to you and you take them back into your life. Well, you've just made a choice that has a risk to that. When you're dating somebody, that's a choice. You have a risk. When you get into business with somebody, that's a choice that has a risk, that has a price. Getting a tattoo as a woman and as a man has a price to it. What is that price? Well, there are going to be older generation of people who will not hire you based on the fact that you have a tattoo, especially if you have it somewhere where it's seen, where you can see it. Her argument was, then I just vet those people out. And I said, that's fine, but that's a price. That's a choice that has a price. You're paying that price. You may not get that opportunity. Well, that's fine. I don't want that opportunity. Okay, that's fine. But it's something that you will pay for with the choice that you make. Is it right or wrong that somebody doesn't want to hire you because of a tattoo? I don't know. I think about somebody who has, maybe even the employer doesn't think it's right or wrong, or doesn't mind it, thinks it's beautiful, but their clientele doesn't, or 25% of their clientele may not frequent that establishment if they have somebody at the front who has a tattoo. Their obligation is to their business and to their shareholders, not to the young woman who decided to get a tattoo. They have to appease or appeal to their clientele, not to the young woman who decided to get a tattoo. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. It's just a price, And so I'm trying to get them to think about the choices that they make and the prices that they'll have to pay. And I think, both of my teenage daughters are going to have different ways that they design their life. And I think they both eventually want to have a family and children, although, maybe not. Maybe one of them won't, or maybe one of them will wait longer. But I'm trying to, tell them that in my experience, from what I know now in my life, 54 years old, those things don't happen unless you plan them. They don't happen the way you want them to happen unless you plan, you visualize, and you make those visions of your life. it kind of goes back to, what I was saying before. It's like, yeah, you do 5-year plans work in business. They're good to have. They don't always turn out. In a young person's life, especially a woman's life, because the reality is the window of procreation is limited for women. Men can procreate potentially until they die, into their 80s or 90s. I mean, look at Mick Jagger. I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't. I'm just saying that the biological possibility is there. Women have an opportunity that's between, 15, 14 years old and, sometimes even 50 years old. But still, that's a window, So when do you want that? When do you want to have children? Well, you might want to have children when you're at your peak fertility and your peak strength in your body, so that, because birthing children takes a lot, is a big price to pay for your body. And then there's the window of time where you're breastfeeding and that you want to be real close to your children, especially as a mom. And if you want to have 3 children, well, then you space them out a year, and you have that window of time where it's peak, And when do you want to start thinking about that? Obviously, first step is finding a husband to do that with. And so anyway, these are the kind of things that I'm trying to get them to understand or to start thinking about now. And it's not always an easy conversation, because obviously I have my own opinions. They see the world the way they want to see it. And has it gotten a little enthusiastic, some of the conversations? Yes, but not disrespectful and not like demeaning and not judgmental. But there's a price that I will pay, maybe, as a father, if I don't at least plant some seeds in their heads right now about to start to think about these things. And it's also a warning, to say, don't make these decisions lightly. And if you do make those decisions, understand what the price is. I mean, I think, fatherhood, especially when your kids are this age, that's one of the main things that I can do as a father, is to tell my children what things cost. Not only, cars, houses, tuition, all of those things that actually have numbers on them, but choices. This is the cost. Do you want to pay for it? Don't make some of those decisions that come with a high price without understanding what the price is. And those are, they're interesting conversations if you go at it with the right level of open-mindedness and open-heartedness. But it can also be, you're not sitting as their friend. You're sitting as a guide and a mentor and an advisor and somebody who's been around the block. And this idea that, I think my parents, they did some of that, but for the most part, especially my dad, especially with sobriety, like, because he was sober, he really tried to warn me of the price of addiction, and he could see that I had that in my behavior, and he did this best he could to warn me about that. And eventually I figured it out, and I started to understand the price, and I started making wiser choices about that. He tried to warn me a couple times about some of the women that I was seeing. But I didn't, I didn't listen. But now, in retrospect, those conversations have really helped me, even though I still made the mistakes that he was warning against. It's like, now that I've made those mistakes too, it's like a bolstering effect of oh yeah, okay, now there was somebody who was warning me. There's somebody who had lived longer than I had, and now I really, like, I see his point of view, and maybe because of those conversations, I won't make the same mistakes twice, because I remember those conversations. I remember those warnings. And it's difficult for me sometimes because, yeah, do I want to be their friend? Do I want them to love me and think all of my opinions are wonderful and look up to me? And yeah, I want all that. But there are certain things that my opinions and my points of view and my perspectives don't line up with theirs. And I'm willing to engage with them, to challenge them to a certain degree. I'm willing to pay the temporary price of being seen as maybe even misogynistic, or maybe even some ist, that they might want to label me as, to tell them about my experiences and about, as a business owner, you run into all of these labels that are thrown around in society, because you do have to make choices that are immediately impactful to your bottom line. And sometimes choices can seem racist or homophobic or misogynistic when you make certain choices, but after a certain amount of experience in your particular business, you realize that some of those stereotypes are actually real. Some of those generalizations are real. And in order to not run your business into the ground, you have to start actually behaving in alignment with reality. Because, I think there's an old saying, like, if you're a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart, and if you're liberal when you're old, you don't have a head, or something like that. I don't necessarily like those terms, but as you move along and work in the real world and in an arena of money that's, it answers to you really quickly, you realize, I think you do just inherently become definitely more fiscally conservative as you move along. And I think when it comes to familial relationships too, and intimate relationships, you start to realize that, for one, promiscuity for both men and women has a high price to pay for doing that. There's a high mental price to pay for running around and sleeping with people, a lot of people. It's detrimental long term, maybe more so for women than men. That's sort of up to some people to decide. I don't know. I can't quote statistics on that in terms of like pair bonding. I've heard that women that are promiscuous have a harder time pair bonding long term. And I guess I can kind of see that in the world. I don't know whether it's our DNA or what it is, but it's like those choices have prices, and so I guess all in all, what I'm trying to say is, especially for the young folks, look at the price of everything, look at it through the eyes of somebody who has seen or been around and made some judgment calls and has made some mistakes, because surely I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and somebody who has gotten through those mistakes and now is on solid ground. Like, what kind of things did they have to face in order to get to a place where they understand the price of things, and they don't just go through their life willy-nilly, because there's this new age that everything happens for a reason, and just I get it. Yeah, you want to be in the moment and be present, but if you're really present, truly present, you're going to see red flags all over the place too. But if you're constantly being run by your emotions and your desire for reality to be a certain way, you're eventually going to find out what reality is. And this realm is a school, of course, and I've said that before. And you are going to learn the lessons that you're going to learn. But maybe some of those things aren't your lessons to learn. Maybe some of those things you can just listen and make the right choices and not have to learn those things. And then the lessons that you learn will be on a higher level, a more evolved level. And I'm not saying I'm right about everything, but I'm saying that everything that I'm trying to pass on to my daughters and my other, children too, is something that I can with a great deal of confidence say that this works. If you do this, this works. If you do this, this is the price. Like I'm at a place in my life where I question things all the time, but there are certain things that I know now. I don't have to question certain things. And if I know them, I'm going to try to figure out a way to at least express it to my developing children in a way that they can grasp it. And again, it's not to save them from making the wrong choices. It's to just plant a seed of remembrance, when they start to go through that, maybe that conversation comes up and they say, oh yeah, this is what he was talking about. Now I get it, So anyway, there's always a price to be paid for all of your choices, and know what that is. Rock on.